Zimbabwe is changing, but in what way? Robert Mugabe may be gone. Well, what sort of mess, if indeed it is a mess, has he left behind, and how can that be cleared up? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. You know, he once said only God could remove him, but perhaps in this case God has moved in rather mysterious ways. The people have been celebrating, but like the rest of us, do they have any idea what's coming?
After 37 years, an unsympathetic farewell to Africa's longest-serving leader.
We are so happy. We are overwhelmed.
Detained by the military, stripped of his party's leadership, and put under house arrest.
Notice of resignation.
Robert Mugabe's resignation brings to an end a tumultuous week for Zimbabwe. But what does his departure mean for the country? And how will history label him?
Comrades in the national struggle, ladies and gentlemen, Happy New Year.
1980. Prime Minister Robert Mugabe addresses the nation after a peaceful transition to black majority rule. Initially heralded as a freedom fighter, Mugabe's authoritarian regime presided over the decline of Zimbabwe's once promising economy, and the government accused of widespread human rights violations. From the breadbasket of Africa to a country known more for poverty and repression. The final years of his rule have seen Zimbabwe's worst political crisis since its independence. Earlier this month, Mugabe sacked his vice president and potential successor, Emmerson Mnangagwa. Critics say Mugabe was clearing the way for his wife, Grace Mugabe, to take control. Actions that many believe prompted the non-violent military coup.
What the Zimbabwe Defense Forces is doing is to pacify a degenerating political, social, and economic situation in our country, which, if not addressed, may result in a violent conflict.
A divisive character in his home country, he's seen by many Africans as the hero who stood up to British colonialism. And after nearly 4 decades in power, many in Zimbabwe have only known his leadership. For the country to move into the future, will it need to leave Mugabe's politics in the past?
Very pleased to say I'm joined at the round table today by the Zimbabwean political analyst George Sheary. Also with us, Mike Jennings, the head of development studies SOAS, part of the University of London. We have Lloyd Nsipha, who's executive director at the African Public Policy Research Institute, and Zimbabwean author and political analyst Tam Zhou. Very pleased to have you all with us here today. Let me start perhaps with you, Lloyd. Where did it all start to go wrong?
I think at independence in 1980, President Mugabe took power, but one thing he did not do, he did not decolonize. He carried on with the same inherited institutions from the Ian Smith regime. The laws were still in place. IPA, POSA, those are remnants of Smith's legislation. So when come 2000, when his popularity was waning.
20 years after he came to power.
20 years after he came to power, and his popularity was waning, that's when the land issue kicked in. This was kick-started by the war veterans after the social villages actually instigated it. So that is when he actually started to redistribute the land. By then, he had done 20 years without doing anything with regards to what he had inherited from Smith. So that looked in the context of what has happened. The land distribution was a rush job. The whole policy was okay, but the execution was done in a haphazard manner, and that actually exacerbated the problem. To this day, we're actually suffering from
So no new ideas?
no new ideas.
After 1980.
After 1980,
Right.
failure to decolonize, failure to make Zimbabwe an African state.
Yeah.
It literally remained a British colonial country run by a blackface.
Sam, is that what you recognise, that this was a man for whom getting power was possibly the only important thing, that he had no real ideas what to do with it once he got it?
No, I disagree. I mean, you were there at the Lancaster House, 1979, 1980. You spoke to people at that time. It was very clear what the Patriotic Front, because they included ZAPU and ZANU at the time, and other players. There were a lot of intellectuals who were going to join. So I always disagree with people who say something has gone wrong, because what has basically happened here is, as the army said, this is correction. Anyone who says there's anything gone wrong...
Sorry, let me jump in. This is a bankrupt country.
Come on.
No, there is...
It is, George, it is.
Okay,
your turn in a second. Your turn in a second. Sam, carry on.
So let's go back to this. The people within ZANU-PF have said that...
Which is the ruling party for those
Which
who
is
don't
the
know.
ruling
Yeah.
party, the party of Robert Mugabe, the party that has always kept him in power, are saying that he had overstayed, and they are the ones who are behind his leaving power, if you like. So everyone is saying his time has been up a very long time ago. So you would think that he was now a prisoner of power. There was no longer any purpose or any reason. So anyone who says something has gone wrong is expecting that he's supposed to have carried on maybe another 5 years, another 10
No, I'm thinking, where did he go wrong with the country? But George, you said to me a few minutes ago, you said to me you didn't think it had gone wrong at all.
The framing, if you want your discussion to make sense, you really have to reframe the where you begin. This idea that, as he says, it went wrong, assumes, the way you describe the problem explains the answers you come up to it. It is not the case that the decolonial project was derailed. In 1980 was the moment of independence. Okay, that's the moment of independence. The moment of the land distribution program is the continuation of the unfinished business of the liberation movement. Where we are now is to intergenerationally, where do you go from there? What begins to imprison Robert Mugabe after 2014 is his thing. On one end, he says so in his parting shot, I want the future to be run by young people, right? But the problem is the ones that he thinks are the young, the G40, aren't generative.
We will get on to the young in just a moment.
If then you come back to it, what went wrong? It is that reorientation, which precisely is the moment which ZANU recalls him.
Okay, let me bring in Mike here, because everybody else has had a say. And if the question is wrong, when I say what went wrong, the alternative to that is what went right. And did anything go right for Zimbabwe after independence?
Well, I think firstly we need to, it's difficult at a time like this, but we do need to depersonalise it. What this is about is ZANU-PF determined to stay in power and a concerted effort to put in place someone new who can keep ZANU-PF in power. Once Mugabe could no longer keep that party in power, he was of no use, and so therefore he was deposed. So this was going to happen at some point. It could have happened 5 years ago, it could happen 5 years in the future. The catalyst, Grace Mugabe, isn't the cause of it, that just is the catalyst. And so we need to focus on ZANU-PF and think about its role as a liberation party, because the experience in Zimbabwe and with ZANU-PF is not dissimilar to the experience of liberation parties we can see elsewhere. So if we ask what went right, well, from the perspective of the ZANU-PF, what has gone right is they have stayed in power. They have managed...
From the point of view of the Zimbabwean citizen who's not politically aligned, where did it go right? Are they better off now in any way than they were in 1980? Give us just a second.
Well, I think economically, clearly they're not better off. Well, I think it's difficult to say they are better off in some ways, but I think we need to avoid the trap. Zimbabwe is often cast as an incredibly repressive regime where no one has any freedom, yet if you walk the streets of Harare and other cities and towns, you don't get that sense of oppression that people expect to have. There is a vibrant community, people have a good education, the university there is fantastic. So we mustn't fall into this trap that everything is terrible, because it clearly isn't. There are many things that are wrong, but that isn't the same as saying that nothing has gone right.
George, I know you want to come in, but I'm going to go to Lloyd.
Let's-
It's equal times on this
Yes.
programme. If we can.
Need to, when we say what went wrong, we need to look at this in the context. If nothing had gone wrong, the army wouldn't have come in to take corrective measures. For the army to come in, for the military to intervene, that means something had gone wrong within ZANU-PF. And this going wrong didn't start today within ZANU-PF. It started even before independence, when Ndabaningi Stole was president of ZANU. Things were counter-revolutionaries had infiltrated ZANU-PF, and the military had to intervene to correct the anomaly in the party. So when we say President Mugabe came into power in 1980 and he did not decolonize, it means that at the time when we were supposed to hit the ground running, he took a sabbatical for 20 years. Joshua Nkomo, his argument at the time in 1980 was for the land distribution exercise to start immediately. That's what he wanted. But Mugabe argued that he was persuaded to have that 10-year moratorium. In that 10 years, it was on willing seller, willing buyer basis. None of the farmers wanted to sell their farms. That, I think, was a problem, because if we had started the distribution exercise in 1980, when the economy was able to carry an agricultural revolution, then Zimbabwe would be at a different place. And
George looks as though he's about to burst, so he's desperate to jump in.
I want to underscore where he began,
right?
Okay, because the way I really began by saying the way you look, what you think the problem is, determines what you say afterwards. Everybody knows the first 10 years of Zimbabwe's independence was forestalled, if you like, slowed down by the anticipation. If anybody, whether they liked it or not, did anything about the land question, it would undermine the spectre of South Africa. Okay? Everybody knows that that's fact. Everybody also know that the Lancaster House detail could not have made that possible anyway. The land occupation began in Soshe, driven by people. ZANU as a party and the president and the state come after the event. So we need to give Zimbabwean people urgency.
Okay, George. No, we can't have a 2, 3, 4 at the moment because it's only a relatively short programme. But Tam, if we go back to the fact that this is ZANU-PF perhaps consolidating its power,
yes.
It's more of the same. And we always hear that the war veterans have such a hold over Zimbabwean politics and ZANU-PF. Why, when most of these people must be in their 70s now, are they an amorphous mass? Are they a real political movement? Are they just the nation's conscience? What are these war veterans politically these days?
They are a very strong force. You're talking about tens of thousands, probably 75,000 or so. They're not necessarily in their 70s, because the majority of these people joined the liberation struggle as teenagers. Some went when they were as young as 14 to join the liberation war in the 70s. So what you are having is they will say they volunteered to go and die for the country, but they also were prepared to die for values and what they believed that Zimbabwe should look like. And what the army generals were saying, and what the faction within ZANU-PF that Emmerson Mnangagwa leads or is assumed to be leader of are saying, is that there are certain values that they went to war and they were prepared to die for, which they think are under threat now with the kind of new generational democratic principles that G40 and the social media activists are
Is there a sort of form of emotional blackmail, if you like, by the war veterans who can say...
I am one of them. I'm sitting in front of you.
Okay,
I'm amazed you're talking as if I'm absent. I was 14.
Can I just finish this question? Okay. Is there a form of emotional blackmail whereby the war veterans say, listen, we gave everything for our country, therefore any other party, any other movement has no legitimacy?
No. If I can patiently say no. In 1964, ZANU First Conference makes a declaration that the only way of defeating settler colonialism is direct confrontation. That is the moment of the birth of of the first group of freedom fighters.
I'm talking about today.
Yes, it's a continuum. You have to see it not distinct from. It has a history that has continued to there. I joined from that moment when I was 14. I have not changed. I'm still here. Okay? And I'm not blackmailing anybody. We made a decision to confront coloniality, whatever form, in whatever time, with that passion, with that emotion, with that continuity. And it has remained a powerful force in the organization of ZANU. Now, if you take South Africa as an example, so ANC is like an alliance, you know, the tripartite state. Zimbabwe is the same. It is alliances that constitute its making, of which the war veterans are a very central part that stitches it together. So they're not a yesterday event. They're very central to think. You can disagree with them, but they are deadly, seriously central to Zimbabwe politics.
Let's move away from this, if I may. I want to ask you another question, because we are constrained by time. In terms of whether you believe Zimbabwe is a basket case or not, it has a failed economy at the moment. Where does it need to pick up? Because we're talking about farming, we're talking about tourism, we're talking about mining. Which one of those is in any way successful at the moment? Well, how does any new president sort that out?
All right. Well, I think that one of the questions is, does whoever the new president is, although I think are all probably fairly unanimous in who it's going to be, what scope do they have for making changes? So there is plenty. Zimbabwe has had a successful economy and can have again, but the ZANU-PF and the military are so enmeshed in the economy. They own so many companies, they have vested interests. So the question is, can someone put forward pragmatic policies that will bring in foreign investment, that will open up the economy, that will restore stability and growth without threatening those vested interests? Because if those interests are threatened, they simply won't be allowed to happen.
Okay, so you have a controlling interest, or people who have a controlling interest in the richest areas of the economy. How is the new president, who's seen as much more of a pragmatist than perhaps Mugabe, how is this new president going to be able to persuade outside investors to come in and say this is a country worth putting your money into now?
In his time as vice president, Emmerson Mnangagwa has shown that he's actually more of a liberal, more looking globally. As vice president, he's championed the command agricultural policy, where we've seen the doubling of output in Zimbabwe. Internationally, we've seen him engaging the Russians and the Chinese to come in and invest in Zimbabwe. So this is the man that even Westminster is looking at as someone who's more open, to do business with the rest of the world. So I do not see how even the military, considering what you've just framed now, that they've got controlling interest. This is the man who's actually willing to reverse some of the unpopular, rules that have been put in place, to have a global reach. I know that because as we speak now, at some point he was Minister of Justice, and he was supposed to carry out executions as Minister of Justice.
Not supposed to carry, but supposed to have had.
And he didn't do that. And that shows...
He maintains he didn't. There are others who say he wasn't.
No, he did not. No, he did not.
Okay. He was behind it.
No, he didn't. He did not.
I'm not talking about other people's suggestions.
No, people will speak. So people will speak. So the man is, as I said, is a liberal, and I think the world should just give this man a chance and see what happens in the next few months.
Sam, what's the priority financially for ordinary reasons?
Let me put it this way. If I was president of Zimbabwe coming in, the first thing is to realize that there's an opportunity in tourism. This is a country that everyone wants to go to.
Didn't you talk to the head of tourism?
Yes, I spoke to the head of tourism last night. So this is a country that is ready to receive the world, especially now that some of the destinations are threatened by insecurity, terrorism, and all that. Zimbabwe is safe, is a place where people should go. I would also ask people to come and invest in infrastructure, especially power stations and railways, because Zimbabwe is the hub of the SADC region. Almost all goods trains pass by or through Zimbabwe. And water as well. Zimbabwe, I would canalize the whole country, because there's no point in having a rainy season and water flows down to Mozambique and floods and causes havoc. So, but there's money, especially in the West. You can't put it in the offshore accounts anymore. I would be saying to everyone, come and put your money in Zimbabwe, because that's where it's going to be safe. So for the ordinary people, life will immediately change.
That's going to get the hundreds of thousands who left.
Because because once you
the educated middle class
yeah,
have left.
because,
It's gonna go back.
yeah, because if you are going to build 30 power stations, everyone gets a job, roads, everything.
Either he thinks I'm asking idiotic questions, or he
really,
thinks
no,
everybody else here is talking nonsense.
You really keep on going on a trajectory that gives you a dead end. The question you asked him is quite important, because if you look at studies, independent studies, Sussex has done some, LSE has done some, around the success of the land distribution program and how much it's brought ordinary Zimbabweans out of poverty. Okay, it is not the meaning. It is not the breadbasket image. Is not how Zimbabweans see it. So to say it's in crisis, we have to think of what exactly do we mean by in crisis. That's one.
George, jump in.
I mean,
Sorry, not George.
I suppose I would just question.
No, we do have limits of time.
Certainly, there are. I mean, I agree that the land redistribution programme is not the basket case that it has been presented, but neither can we say it has been implemented in a way that has achieved the things that it could have done. It was implemented poorly. It was implemented for political purposes, and it was implemented to maintain Mugabe's authority at a time when he was facing challenges to his authority. So on that basis, it succeeded, but it could have done so much more.
I want us to resist the argument that sees Robert Mugabe being driven by self-interest.
No, that's not what. That's not.
Well, I didn't say that's. Wait a minute. You are saying so. I can challenge you. And I'll give you examples.
I want to ask you about
the
youth of Zimbabwe, which you don't represent because you're.
No, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Come on. Come on.
You don't represent the youth.
If I want to say
of a
something,
certain age.
let me tell you something. He just referred to Mzembe. Yes? Mzembe is part and parcel of the G40. The kind that people thought,
who are the youngsters?
Just a minute. Please.
The tourism is America.
Look,
How do you make the young people of Zimbabwe happy with the changes? Let me just ask you that.
what has to happen in Zimbabwe is revisiting what intergenerational politics means intellectually, ideologically, both in practice and principle, which is not the same thing having a fetish about the young. You understand?
Well, the young are the future.
No, I didn't say they're not. I've just said to you again, nobody in Zimbabwe is against intergenerational politics. That means putting the young at the center of it. Nobody is. The question is, what does that mean in practice? What Robert Mugabe actually said in his parting shot, I want the future of Zimbabwe to be in young people. Question back to him, what sort of young people, right? And if you think about it, the G40 to which Grace Mugabe was a power base was composed presumably of young people, okay? And so the corrective for me is for Zimbabwean young people to define for themselves what does occupation of young people mean?
Right,
intergenerationally.
Let's put this into context. The war veterans, there is tremendous respect for them, and because they represent the nationalistic paradigm, they are the custodians of our values as
and the same goes for Mugabe to a large extent because he's an elder Shona and there's respect for your elders.
Exactly, yes. But then as we move on, you know, as the young people in Zimbabwe, as the children of these war veterans, we now need to embrace the global village, sell Zimbabwe as a destination of choice, you know, that people can come to. We should not be bogged down with the semantics of that Mugabe did this, Mugabe did that, because we now...
I'm not trying to do that. What I'm trying to ask is, when the youth and the people celebrating, as we see on our screens, when we see them celebrating, find out that to some extent they're just getting a realignment of the ruling party with a different person in charge. When the young people see that not an awful lot has changed in their way of life.
What I hope will happen beginning this week is a new administration realizing that the young people of Zimbabwe have a future and then inviting them in. I expect that there will be representation of the youth within whatever government that is going to be formed going forward to articulate the vision or the aspirations of the younger generation, because Emmerson Mnangagwa will be well aware that if he doesn't incorporate this constituency that we normally call social media West, he is going to
Otherwise
fail
it's going to be frustration.
Yes.
I think this is an optimistic view, I have to say, that I think, you know, this is not a replacement of the Guards, this is just shifting around.
Exactly.
This is not a generational shift.
That's right.
I think people are going to be very
see problems
disappointed.
with the youth?
Yes, because I think, you know, we've seen this elsewhere, that when you unleash social tensions, it's very difficult to put them back in and contain them. Now, it can be done. The story of the Arab Spring really is one of protests and tensions unleashed, the momentum amongst the youth, and in some countries it was successfully contained. But it's introducing a new level of instability into the equation. And as people realise that their hopes have been dashed, I think that is going to generate more anger. Having seen a glimmer of light, having seen the door move slightly ajar when it's firmly shut back again, which I think it will be, then I think that will create very significant tensions.
George, very quickly, because we're going to come into the end of the programme. Lloyd, I'm terribly sorry. Are we going to see a second revolution? If this is not a revolution, just a changing of the guard, is there going to be a second one?
What I see is what I've been calling the struggle over the mind. I think what young people need to do is to understand the histories that produce their past, present, and future. And that's the critical question. ZANU-PF is consolidated its power base. Okay, what ZANU-PF has been able to do, it is more united today than it has been over the last 30 years. Okay, it is able, and the thing about what the challenge that does is for young people to define for themselves in relation to the histories that have produced them where they got from here. I'm afraid I don't hear much of that. Okay, I hear managerial argument. I hear an administration. It's important, but it's not the central question to address.
It's going to be very difficult to stop you, George, I know, but unfortunately we have run out of time. We can continue this conversation. We'll probably have it on another day as well. I think the only thing we can agree on, and there have been a few disagreements, is that nothing is ever going to be the same in Zimbabwe again. Quite what the future holds, we will have to wait and see. From a very lively round table, I hope you've enjoyed watching it. I've enjoyed talking to my guests. From me, David Foster, and the team, see you next time. Bye-bye.